Hey, welcome back to my podcast, Raised by Religion, My Exodus to Freedom. I am 43 years old. I was born and raised in the Church of Christ, and I recently, over the past few years, left the Church of Christ. If you want to go back and listen to my other podcast, you will get some information about just what that church is all about. Trust me, I know all the ins and outs. I am a preacher's kid, a PK. If you ever see somebody say I'm a PK, preacher's kid. So most of both sides of my family, meaning my husband's and my side, are all Church of Christ, most of them. So anyway, tonight's episode is called Cult of Personality, which is the song you just heard. That was done by Living Colour back in the 80s or 90s. Maybe late 80s, early 90s. One of my favorites from back then. And it basically talks about leaders that exploit their followers for their own personal gain. A tale as old as time, right? So I'm going to talk about, is the Church of Christ a cult? Do I think the Church of Christ is a cult? We'll just say that. And I'm not going to give you a straight out answer just yet because I want to explain some things. And I do want to preface this episode before I get into it. I don't care much for labels, you know. It doesn't, you can call yourself a Christian, you can call yourself agnostic. You know, at the end of the day, we're just all humans. You know, we have our beliefs, we have our ideas, the way we live our lives. It's different from person to person. And I said all that to say, I don't really care about the cult issue. But I think it's interesting because I've heard people say that over the years. I've heard them say, when they hear the Church of Christ, when, you know, I would mention it even when I was in the church, they say, oh, that cult that believes in water baptism, and if you're not baptized in water, you die, you go to hell, and, you know, they don't use instruments. That's basically, you know, what you'll hear about the Church of Christ. And once I left the church, I joined some support groups, and many people would call the Church of Christ a cult. And I just couldn't accept that at first because it didn't, it was so normalized that I didn't feel like I was in a cult, you know. And the cults you see on TV are totally different from the Church of Christ as far as it's not as exclusive. They don't have their own little community, and they don't have their one leader for the whole group. So I just always thought, nah, it's not a cult. But then I got to thinking about it. And I started wondering, what if it is, but it's just a clever cult? And I hate to think of people being clever who come up with religions like that. But I think there is maybe a little bit of genius in it, and maybe they don't even realize it, because each congregation is autonomous. It rules itself. You know, you see the model for the Baptist church, and there is a convention, and there are higher ups, almost like a corporation, if you will, or even a college. I don't know if you compare it to a college, but to say they have higher ups, okay, that you go to. Catholicism, there's the Pope, they're the priests. I don't know a lot about Catholicism, so I'm not going to speak much on it. So you have this structure of the Church of Christ where every congregation, like I said, it rules itself. And, you know, their interpretation of the scriptures says that you have to have deacons and elders, and there are qualifications for the deacons, there are qualifications for the elders, And they are the ones that are supposed to watch over the flock, meaning the congregation. And they talk about that God set this up, and this is actually pretty smart in my opinion, that God set it up that way so that one man wouldn't be leading the congregation, that you would have a group of men making the decisions and watching over the flock, which totally makes sense. However, that's not how it happens, at least in my experience. I'm going to say that any episode that I make, it is my experience only. There's somebody somewhere, lots of people I'm sure, whose experiences in the Church of Christ vary vastly. So just let me say that off the bat. But I just want to explain to you, I grew up in the South, kind of in between, kind of in the middle between the North and the South, but we're considered the South. And I grew up in small congregations. I don't think my dad was a preacher of more than like 100, a congregation of more than 100 people, maybe. I'm not sure. I don't really remember the highest numbers that were attending each congregation that he was a preacher of. So you have this model that they get from the scriptures where you have this leadership, you've got, elders and then deacons, and the preacher doesn't have any authority unless he is ordained an elder or a deacon. He has no authority, no say so in the matter. Because that's very different from the denominations that I know of, because they call what we call our preacher, they call their pastor. They call him the pastor because he is the pastor of the flock. And that's how a lot of denominations that I have seen or heard of have done it. Now, the very legalistic part of the Church of Christ will not call their preacher pastor. Why? Because technically, according to the scriptures, there's more than one elder, and that a pastor, that's the definition of an elder, not the preacher, if that makes any sense. I hope I just made sense. So, it's it's a very particular order of how things should go. However, that does not happen, especially in these small Southern congregations that my dad has been a preacher at, or that I've been involved in or have seen, which, let me tell you, where I live, they're everywhere. There are more Baptists than anything, I will say that, but there are lots of churches of Christ, and each congregation that I have been to or been involved with, most of them do not have elders and deacons. However, because you have to want to be an elder or deacon, you just can't be forced into it, right? However, these congregations that I've been a part of did not have elders or deacons, and there was always one guy. He was the big dog, and he made all the decisions, and it usually wasn't the preacher. It was a man in the congregation that just thought he was the guy that was going to make all the decisions, and everything had to go through him. And I know a congregation in particular. This really gets on my nerves. Sorry. There's a man, he's well known in the community, in the Church of Christ community in this area, and in other areas, but mainly in this area. He'd probably say he started it, but I'll just say he helped start a congregation in this town that didn't have one. And he thinks, and this is personal experience now, I'm not going to tell you what he thinks. I'll just tell you what happens. Everything has to go through him. Everything. If somebody doesn't call him when there's a decision to be made, you have to call him. Whether he's, I'm not gonna be any more specific, but he has to be called. And this isn't the first. I remember a congregation that my dad preached at in Virginia, that there was one man. Everything had to go through him. One man. And so that's been my experience. And it never was my dad, by the way. It never was my dad. He never was the guy that, it was always some man in the congregation who wanted to be on a power trip. So anyway, so here is my case for why the Church of Christ is a cult. Let's think about the examples of popular cults that, have been in the mainstream media. We'll talk about Jim Jones. Okay. Now, that is an extreme case. If you know anything about Jim Jones and his group of followers, you know that it ended in a mass suicide of 900 people. Those are the ones that drank the Kool-Aid. And so that's an extreme example of a cult. But you have one man that they all look to for guidance and for leadership. And that, of course, was Jim Jones. And before I go any further, let me take my glasses off so I can see. Let me read the definition of a cult from Oxford. A system of religious veneration and devotion directed toward a particular figure or object. Here's another definition right below that one. A relatively small group of people having religious beliefs or practices regarded by others as strange or sinister. A misplaced or excessive admiration for a particular person or thing. So when you hear people, I'm not even going to talk about that. So let's move on, talking about the one guy, the one man who is in charge of everything. So going back to, hold on a second. I'm so sorry. Loud truck going by, or car, I can't tell. Anyway, so we gave the example of Jim Jones, Waco, David Koresh. There are others. There's one, I can't think of the name of it, but it was another one that basically was a suicide cult. So those are extreme examples. But I want, if you, especially if you are someone who has left the Church of Christ, I want you to look at it from an objective point of view. Even though each congregation is autonomous and there's not one leader over all of the congregations, right? Think about how the congregations I just told you about that I have experience with, and compare that. It's very smart because each congregation, that I have been a part of has that one man. So in its own way, like each little congregation is a cult. If and that just hit me one day, because I always had objected to calling the Church of Christ a cult because of those examples, because of those extreme examples that we talked about. But there is religious abuse in the Church of Christ. It gets covered up. There's no accountability for it. I mean, I've seen it, and I will not say which congregation, but I've seen things happen, like toys being taken away from a baby because the baby was making too much noise, so they just took the toys and hid them. Yes, that really happened. And just other things that have happened, and I know that may sound like something little to you maybe, but to me, I think that's very sinister because it's a baby. And instead of going to that person and going, he's making a lot of noise with those toys and it's distracting, maybe we ought to limit, because, this child had a big box of toys, and I'm not saying I didn't care either way. He was a baby. Instead of doing that, a group of them hid the toys. And finally, the guardian of this little boy was asking everybody. She asked the preacher, she asked his family, She asked everybody, and everybody lied and said, I don't know. But they knew. And finally, somebody admitted it. Things like that. That's just one example. And that's right there. That's religious abuse. Right? I mean, and so anyway, I don't know why I went on that tangent. But for some reason, it really irritates me because for some reason, the people who have left the Church of Christ don't have a voice. And it really pisses me off because we were scared. I was scared. I was so scared to speak out about the Church of Christ when I left. I did start this podcast, I think it was back in 2021, the fall of 2021, and somebody threw a fit about it, and then I deleted it because I was scared of the repercussions. And so that fear that we have as a group it pisses me off. No one should ever be afraid to speak their truth and to tell their story. But then someone like me who leaves the Church of Christ, and this is before I even did the podcast. I started making TikToks about my journey leaving the Church of Christ. And my own niece got on TikTok, made 3 different accounts to stalk and harass me, 3 different anonymous accounts. That's against the law. And then her mother made an account and harassed me. This is what they do. And nobody says anything about it, right? That ends with me. I ended up, and this, I'm going on a different tangent, but it all kind of goes together with the religious abuse thing. I finally had the nerve, and I'm not saying you should do this, and I'm not saying I'm a badass, pardon the expression, for doing this. I'm just telling you what I did. I have an old Facebook from about 8 years ago. Oh, well, not 8 years ago. It was 2008. That's where I got confused. I made it in 2008, and it has all my Church of Christ friends in this area. It's got my family, both sides of my family on there who are Church of Christ. And I got on there, and I blasted them. I didn't use names. I just said this person, whoever, my niece and my sister-in-law, and you know what? And they all knew who I was talking about. And I said what happened, and I said they put on this facade as holier than thou, but they do shit like this. And that's exactly what I said. Because I am tired. I am so tired of being scared. My husband was worried when I did that. I thought he was mad at first, but he was actually worried that I would get backlash. And I said, what else can they do? I mean, they could come here and harm me physically. But if I could tell you story after story of the stuff that they pulled on me over the years up until just recently. But, it's mind-blowing. And I remember talking to someone in the family about what happened. And they said, well, people have reasons to do what they do. Basically, gaslighting me. Let me explain. I had left them alone for 2 years. I cut them off back in September of 2020. Almost 2 years. Didn't bother them. Didn't stalk their social media. I moved on. And when I finally, I didn't lose my job. I had to lose my job back in June of 2021. I had to take a medical leave. I came back in July, and I had to leave abruptly, by the way. Couldn't believe I was offered my old job back. And not long after that, I was posting TikToks. I was happy. Yay, I'm feeling good. That's when they started attacking me on TikTok. I'm not going to be silent anymore. And if you didn't want me talking about it, then you shouldn't have done it. And I will take accountability for anything I've done. I've already done an episode. If you'll go back, I think it's episode 4. I did an episode about accountability because I want to be transparent. One thing I won't do is use names, but I want to be transparent about my past and let it all hang out, because guess what? I will take accountability for my actions, unlike these people. They don't. There's no accountability for them. But if you walk away from it and stop putting up with their nonsense, then you are to be held accountable, but not them. So anyway, sorry about the tangent, not sorry. So I do believe that the Church of Christ is a cult. And one of the biggest reasons, besides what I've already talked about, but one of the biggest reasons is because their beliefs are very exclusive, more exclusive than any other sect of Christianity or Protestant religion besides the Catholic Church. And I'm not sure if the Catholic Church is even as staunch and legalist as the Church of Christ. Because if you're not a member of the church, then you're going to hell. If you don't go to the Church of Christ, you're going to hell, period. And if you have a Church of Christ member try to debate with you, and if you want something to say back to them, ask them that, point blank. And if you finally get them to say yes, which good luck, they'll do some mental gymnastics to get out of it. But if you finally get them to say yes, remind them of what Jesus said about not judging. So there you go. And then of course they'll do more mental gymnastics. I personally would not debate with any of them. When I left, I told everyone that I'm not having the conversation about my beliefs with you. I know what your beliefs are because I was raised in it. You have the freedom to believe what you believe, and I have the freedom to believe what I believe. I'm not trying to convert you to agnosticism. So don't try to convert me back to your religion, because it's not happening. And that's where I left it. So anyway, I've gone over 22 minutes, which is not the longest episode I've done, but I'm outside and it was so warm today and now I'm freezing to death. So I'm going to go back in. I thank you so much. I have had people reach out and thank me for this podcast. And I just want to tell y'all, thank you for listening and thank you for reaching out. And it's a very lonely journey. And that's one of the reasons why I am speaking out, because it doesn't have to be a lonely journey and you have nothing to fear. At least with me, you don't, because I'm like the least judgmental person you'll probably ever meet. So anyway, just to give you a heads up, this episode will be on YouTube tomorrow, as well as episode 9. It just takes a long time to convert them to video and then get them on YouTube. It's a process, but I will get those done tomorrow. Episodes 1 through 8 are on YouTube. If you just search out Raised by Religion, My Exodus to Freedom, my channel will come up. Is on Apple Podcasts as well, same name. Let's see, if you would like to follow me on TikTok, my username is Tawanda, TAWANDA 379. And on Instagram, it's Karen's So Unusual, which is KARENSOUNUSUAL, I think. Unusual. I think I spelled that right. I'm also on Facebook, but I'm there the least amount. My name is Karen Montgomery, and you'll see my face when you look that name up. So anyway, I thank you again for listening. Thank you. I can't tell you just how warm it makes me feel inside to know that you that some of you don't feel so alone because of this podcast. And no, I'm not going to stop. To that one comment that said, don't stop. Nah, I'm not going to stop until I'm finished. So anyway, you guys have a wonderful evening or day or morning or whatever it is for you right now. I thank you so much. And hopefully in a few days, this Sunday, today's Tuesday. So this coming Sunday, let's see, today is the 7th. 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th. I think it'll be the 12th. I'm going to try to have another one by then, maybe before. So thank you again. Have a wonderful day.